Welcome back to this week's episode of Representation RX, the podcast dedicated to promoting diversity and representation in the medical field. I'm Chloe Cohen, your host, and on this week's episode, we have a special guest joining us today. Today, we are honored to hear from medical student Molly Lavaud. Join us as we delve into her journey, insights, and experiences navigating the medical world as a champion for representation. Molly is a second-year medical student with a passion for the promotion of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, as well as a drive to understand and dismantle racial bias within medical education and healthcare. Her upbringing within a vastly diverse Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Haitian American culture, and her aim at becoming the first doctor in her family are only a few of the many reasons that has instilled this pursuit within her. As she traverses her journey of becoming a doctor, she's recognized that just like her, there are many people out there with little guidance on what process and daily life look like, which inspired her to start her medical student creator Instagram and TikTok account at Mo2Medicine. Through these platforms, she hopes to find even more ways to give back and support those preparing for their journeys to becoming a physician. Welcome, Molly. It's truly an honor to have you today with us on Representation RX.
Thanks for having me. Yes, I'm excited.
So Molly, your dedication to advocating for diversity and inclusivity in the medical field is both inspiring and vital for progress. And as a medical student, your journey not only reflects your passion for medicine, but also your commitment to making the healthcare profession more representative of the diverse communities it serves. So I guess I'm wondering, what made you want to become a doctor and pursue a career in medicine?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of different things that kind of all fit together into the puzzle that eventually made me have this passion to become a doctor. I feel growing up, I always had an interest in kind of math and science. So I knew I felt like I would always do something in STEM. And I was exposed to health careers and healthcare pretty early within high school with our HOSA program. And I learned about all the different kind of career options within medicine, and I felt like a physician best reflected on where I would see myself in a future career. Not only getting that basis with all the knowledge that you learn, but also being able to help patients and also tying in that kind of leadership and teamwork piece.
Yeah.
And it just seemed that something that just had a lot of potential, not only for personal growth, but also for giving back to the community.
Right.
And then from there, I feel like all the experiences, the mentors I've had, the relationships I've formed have further solidified that passion for me. The clinical experiences I've been involved in, the leadership I've done, have all been a part of creating like a solid foundation that reminds me every day that, despite how hard it gets, how unfortunately restricted it is, especially for people who look like me, that my passion is well served and to continue keep fighting.
Yeah. And so were there any moments where you thought medicine might not be the career path for you, or was it always something that you knew you wanted to do?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because I feel as if I always have had a passion for healthcare, and I have like family members who are nurses. So I've been surrounded by people within healthcare. And
Yeah.
anytime I've experienced doubt, it's more so been because of, I would say, kind of factors outside of my control and even some limitations and obstacles I feel like that come with the tradition of pursuing medicine that unfortunately puts a lot of people of color in unfavorable positions to pursue. So
Right.
the cost of pursuing becoming a doctor, the social kind of isolation you may feel going into a space where a lot of people don't look like you,
Right.
but you're expected to bear the brunt and the burden of serving people who look like you because you have this fear that your peers who aren't people of color aren't going to do the job correctly. And just thinking about the stress and the burden that is going to come from the financial, emotional, mental toll, and like the social toll as well is something that has like, and to this day, like still sits with me. And sometimes I really have to sit with myself and check in with myself, especially with my mental and emotional health, to recognize that this is something I'm super passionate about. But if I don't take care of myself, then I can't take care of other people.
Yeah.
And because of that, I definitely have to lean on my support system to remind me as to why I'm doing these things. But unfortunately, we live within a country, within a healthcare system that's not really designed for people like us to enter. And
Right.
sometimes I do find myself kind of giving into that self doubt that comes from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you talk a little bit about like your support system? Who exactly does that involve? How'd you find them?
Yeah, so I think, of course, there's kind of like the basis of my family
Hmm.
that has always gone out of their way, especially my parents, to support me no matter what I
Mm,
wanted to do. Of
yeah.
course, they're obviously really excited because I want to be a doctor and everybody wants a doctor job, but they never forced me to do anything. They
Hmm.
supported whatever dreams and endeavors I wanted to pursue, and eventually that just fell upon becoming a doctor. So they've been super supportive to the point that, like praying over me, just speaking words of wisdom within me. And also, like the other week, my parents came and visited me here because I was starting rotations, and they just like
Mm,
prepped a whole bunch of meat for me, so I don't have to worry about cooking. Like just small
yeah.
things like that. Outside of them, obviously my friends that I grew up with, my friends that I made in undergrad, my friends that I have here now, I feel
Yeah.
like they all play different roles in terms of like friendship support because my peers that are in medical school with me can
Mm,
provide a different support that my peers I made from undergrad can for me, or my friends
right.
from growing back up. And also, I've made what I think is a pretty good support system with faculty at school, and not only appointed faculty that like we just have to have as mentors because they're assigned to us, but there's
Mm,
also a lot of faculty of color who are really extending themselves as mentors and just people for us to rely on in school. So they also make up like a very appreciated big portion of my support system as well.
yeah. So are there any like DEI, groups at your school? What kind of efforts are being done to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, so there's like a lot of official kind of avenues to promote DEI
Mm,
initiatives, as well as just general, like I said before, personal support of
yeah.
faculty that are people of color reaching out to try to mentor students of color. And in terms of more official kind of avenues of promoting DEI, we have like our DEI curriculum committee. So this is a group of faculty as well as students who serve as representatives within the school in order to kind of vet our current curriculum and our programs and our lectures,
Mm,
reflect upon those materials to see whether they're appropriately representative of the patient population that they're supposed to be teaching about. For
right.
example, making sure that we're not using biased language, that we're not
Right.
using race as a biological construct versus a social one, that
Hmm.
make sure that we're reflecting how social determinants of health play an impact into care. It's not just as easy as understanding a disease.
Right.
And basically vetting the curriculum for that, coming up with feedback, and coming out with ways to then give that feedback to our lecturers, professors, faculty, so that they can make sure their curriculum content is reflective of the DI initiatives Emory wants to show. We also have student organizations that are kind of like affinity or identity orgs that allow for safe spaces for students to be a part of. And
Mm,
not to say that when you're in like your lecture hall, it's not a safe space, but I just
mm,
feel like there's a different kind of security and safety and comfort that comes from being within an org, within a group of people who look like you.
right.
So, for example, we have SNMA, which is basically a national organization that was created for the purpose of providing a space, a professional development space for Black students. And
Mm,
it's not open to everybody, but obviously the large proportion are Black students, even at my school. And we just find it as like a safe space, a comfortable space to be with one another, also a space to connect with alumni as well as network with other professionals that are a part of the National Medical Association. We also have other identity orgs like LMSA for Latinx students, APAMSA for Asian students and Pacific Asian students. So there's just so many different kind of official avenues as well as
hmm.
just unofficial kind of extensions of support to rely on.
I guess that kind of leads me to my next question, which is there was a bill that was presented, a couple days ago
Mm-hmm.
that would basically ban DEI from medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to know what your thoughts were on that. And I don't know, for me, who is a person of color who wants to pursue the medical field, I feel like that's a little scary.
Yeah.
But I wanted to know how you feel as someone who is in medical school right now.
Yeah. So I actually just kind of read up more on it this morning, and
Mm,
given how fairly new it is, we haven't received any sort of like statements or feedback from our school if we even receive it, because I realize that it's very in the very early
Right.
initial stages of being presented.
Right.
However, it really is frustrating and disheartening, especially when you have close connections and relationships with a lot of faculty and professionals who have, fought tooth and nail to pave the
Right.
way for these programs to exist and them get
Right.
dismantled by their peers.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with the research showing how increasing diversity and inclusivity within these spaces is resulting in better patient outcomes,
Right.
it just becomes really frustrating to be within this space where you have already been excluded. You've
Mm-hmm.
already felt as if it's not that safe. And now you
Mm-hmm.
have people that could be your faculty, could be your professors, could be your peers in the future,
Mm-hmm.
you know, um, trying to put forth legislature that will basically dismantle everything that you've worked for. And it places a little bit of fear in my heart, not necessarily for myself, but
Mm-hmm.
at least for other people who really want to be a doctor, but maybe deterred by some of these things that are being proposed.
Right.
I want to be optimistic in the hope that, obviously, due to the widespread support of DI initiatives, the literature and research that's showing that these DI initiatives and the increase of people of color within medicine is resulting in better outcomes, that this will not pass.
Yeah.
However, of course, there is concern with the fact that this is even being proposed in the first place.
Right.
And I would hope that when people see these kind of things, that instead of it being a deterrent, they allow it to
Mm.
be kind of like an ignition to kind of light the fire and passion that you already have. To
Yeah.
say that despite that there's people out there that are fighting tooth and nail to exclude me out of these spaces, there is a passion within me to be in that space and I belong
Mm-hmm.
there. There's also people who are ahead of me, whether they're medical students, current doctors, that are also extending themselves as mentors, as supporters, who want to see me in these spaces as well and are
Yeah.
going above and beyond to make sure that I feel welcomed in these spaces. So, one thing I would urge people to do, especially students of color who are considering medicine, like please, please, please find somebody to rely on for mentorship.
Yeah.
Whether they're a medical student, they're already a practicing doctor, because if you try to go through it alone, I feel like you're going to get stuck in the weeds that comes from these kind of articles and things trying to be published and pursued.
Right.
And it can be a deterrent, but I promise you that there are so many people, patients included, that are
Mm-hmm.
fighting for you to be within that space. So to not give up.
Yeah. That's great. I think that's really great advice. I was reaching out to a doctor. Her name is Dr. Nancy Spector. She works at Drexel University
Mm-hmm.
with the ELAM program, which basically promotes women in executive positions within the medical field. And what she and I were talking about is that this actually, despite the efforts to get rid of diversity in the medical field, it actually could be a little bit of an opportunity to see how people can take this and kind of really fight and push for it,
Mm-hmm.
and really show everybody that you know people care about diversity in the medical
Mm-hmm.
field. So I agree. I think it is concerning that this is even something that was created, but I think it
Yeah.
does definitely extend a good opportunity to you know, really push for diversity and make sure that, we kind of get away
Yeah.
from people who feel like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
yeah. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your MCAT and how you
Mm-hmm.
prepared for your MCAT.
Yeah. So, just as a brief disclaimer, I took a year off after undergrad. A
Mm,
big reason why I took a year off is because I did not feel prepared to take my MCAT at the end of my junior year.
mm,
Being first gen and pursuing becoming a physician, I was very kind of wide eyed and naive and optimistic. But once I kind of
mm,
got into the weeds of all that was expected of me for applying, I kind of was like,
yeah.
I need to take a step back and figure this out. And the
Right.
MCAT was one of those things. I wasn't aware initially of how long the test was, how expensive taking the
Yeah.
test was, especially as it comes to getting like resource materials.
Right.
So I really had to kind of sit down and come up with like a realistic plan, given that like I'm first gen, I just have a little part time job, I'm
Hmm.
in school. Like, how can I study for the MCAT where I am able to have like really good resources, but I
Right.
can't drop thousands of dollars to study. Like I don't
Yeah.
have that advantage. I don't have that opportunity. So I took some time to kind of search out like what were the resources that people were mainly using, and I kind of came up with a plan. So for me, I knew that money is an object for me, so I need to be very particular about what I was spending my money on.
Right.
And if there was a way to get things discounted or even free options, I would go that
Mm-hmm.
route versus trying to get like the newest new things. I
Yeah.
know they drop new books every year, but I promise you, if your books is like a year or two off, there probably isn't that big of a difference between what is
Mm-hmm.
being taught in 2024's books than what was taught back in 23, 22.
Right.
And for me, that meant that I was okay with getting a secondhand set of Kaplan books
Mm-hmm.
that for only like $50,
Mm-hmm.
even though they were a couple years old.
Yeah.
And in addition, I also made sure to seek out resources online that were free. So I
Mm-hmm.
loved using the Khan Academy MCAT Prep modules, and I hope they're still up. When I was studying, there was some banner about them maybe being taken down, but I think they might have just got a donation to stay up. So hopefully they're still there. I loved using that to study for chem, orgo, and physics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for cars, I used the Jack Weston website. Unfortunately for me, cars wasn't something I could really study for. I just felt like it was a matter
Right.
of practicing over and over again. So I
Mm-hmm.
really loved using Jack Weston's practice passages because it gave me a lot of practice.
Mm.
And for studying for psychology or the psych section, I liked the MCAT Bros doc. So I think it reflected the psych and sociology section that was also on Khan Academy. So you kind of have a paper kind of document to follow along with the online lecture materials that Khan Academy had. So when it came down to content review, I probably spent less than $100 because I
Mm.
only just bought that book set and I sought out as many free resources as I could. And
Yeah.
that's not to say that, like, paying for Kaplan or Blueprint or Princeton is not good. It just at
Mm-hmm.
that time it didn't work into like the confines that I was in.
Right.
But if you have the means to, I would say go for it.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, I also didn't have the means to be a part of like an MCAT prep course because those
Mm-hmm.
tend to be over $1,000 sometimes.
Yeah.
So I had to really kind of sit down and hone in on what my schedule would look like and really
Right.
stick to it because I didn't have kind of like that outside influence to say like, oh, you need to have these subjects done by the end of the week.
Yeah.
So discipline was a huge thing that I had to work on, and I'm still working on
Right.
to this day. And studying for the MCAT was kind of like the real test of that for
Yeah.
me. And in terms of practice, if there's two things that I would recommend, yes, paid, but however, I'll put an asterisk on the first one, the double AMC resources. If you apply
Mm.
for fee assistance, then you can get them for free.
Mm.
So that's something that I really recommend because not only do you get those materials for free, then you can also, it's either free or heavily discounted, I can't remember, but you also will get to submit your primaries at a heavily discounted / free rate, and you might even be able to
Nice.
use the fact that you're on fee assistance and reach out to schools that send you secondaries and
Mm.
say, hey, I'm on the fee assistance program, can I get this waived or discounted? And they can waive and discount your secondaries fees.
Yeah.
So that's something I'll definitely recommend. And there's one resource, there's no fee assistance or discounts for this, but this is something that I swear by and I still use it to this day, is UWorld. It does have a hefty price tag. However, I did not see like jumps within my full length scores until I
Mm.
started religiously doing UWorld. I
Okay.
still use it today. I use it to study for step 1. I'm going to use it
Mm.
to study for step 2. I just feel like there's not any other resource out there that is reflective like the rigor that comes with like the MCAT and board exams like
Yeah.
UWorld is, and also their explanations for everything are like top tier. Like they break it down to the T, and I feel like sometimes even better than the explanations you would get from the National Board Examiner Associations.
Mm.
So I think those were kind of the things that rounded out my experience for me in terms of spending a little bit on content review and looking for free stuff,
Yeah.
using UWorld for practice as well as double AMC resources,
Mm-hmm.
and just really focusing on practice. I feel like I spent too much time on content review. So if you're starting to get in the weeds, you're starting to go like a month and a half over content review, like start switching over to practice because I feel like
Yeah.
you won't start scoring well until you start practicing.
Yeah.
So that's what my MCAT process looked like for me.
That's really great. And, I think that this is why I am so happy that we were able to connect, because I've been, connecting with people who are already doctors and who have gone through this process years ago,
Mm-hmm.
which is very different from what it is today. And I think that this is a great insight to help other students. I know my parents are not doctors, they're not in the medical field, they have
Mm-hmm.
no idea anything about medicine. And so I think for me, it was a real challenge to figure out the right way to study. I think that you're so real for saying that you really had to sit with yourself and say, like, I know this is something I want to do, but I need to take a step back, and
Yeah.
I need to plan that out, because that's kind of something that I realized halfway into my senior
Hmm.
year when I already started studying for the MCAT. Um, but I think that that's something that's really important and really great advice. What were some of the challenges for you when applying to medical school?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, the financial aspect of it was a big thing.
Right.
Not in the terms of affordability, but also in the terms of prior knowledge. Like I said,
Mm,
I was kind of like taking it day by day,
right.
and it wasn't like anything that I had known maybe years prior that I'm like, okay,
Mm,
I'm applying in 2.5 years. Let me start saving up $1 a day.
mm,
So by the time I was ready to apply, just started learning about how expensive it was to apply to medical school. And for me, that meant if I'm going to do this, I was like, I really want to do this once and I want to do it well. I don't
yeah.
have the time, the money, the means to just keep applying over and over again.
Yeah.
And again, that led to kind of like my decision on pushing back of trying to matriculate straight through because I knew I needed time off not only to study for the MCAT, but also to make sure that like I was making a quality application and
Right.
hopefully that I could work full time and use whatever money I'm making from working full time to help afford the cost of applying.
Mm,
So for me, the financial obstacle was kind of pretty big for me. Another thing, I felt like I wasn't as knowledgeable in the application process.
mm,
And there's a lot of things that I learned being a medical student now, working with admissions at my school now, that I didn't realize were that important from when I was applying. And that's not to say things have changed. I think it's more
mm-hmm.
so just that I wasn't aware.
Right.
So, for example, like people pre-write secondaries to the point that admissions had told us that, not to deter people, but to understand the importance of trying to apply as soon as possible,
Mm-hmm.
that they're sending out secondaries and there's hundreds of students sending their responses back the same day that they get it.
Wow.
And obviously, that's not something I'm aware of. Of course, I took my
Right.
time, but
Yeah.
I didn't realize that this is like kind of what you're competing against.
Right.
And that's not to say that you have to be the first person to send in your application, because at the end of the day, it's quality over everything.
Mm-hmm.
If you need to take extra time because you need somebody else to review your personal statement, you need to focus on your MCAT a little
Mm-hmm.
more, you just want to feel better prepared, take that time for you.
Right.
Because this is coming from somebody that I think I sent in my secondary's application for my school the week it was due,
Mm,
and luckily enough, like I was blessed enough to still get into the school. I'm not recommending people to do that, but
yeah.
that just goes to show that you do not have to be the first person. But I
Right.
still want people to be aware of like what you're competing against, because
Right.
these are your peers. And that's not to say you aren't an exceptional student or an exceptional applicant, but
Right.
obviously the longer you wait, the larger pool that you're competing against. And sometimes schools just hit a point where they have too many applications coming in that they may not even be able to screen you.
Right.
So definitely take that into consideration. So I feel like time is another obstacle on
Right.
top of the financial and just the mental and emotional burden that comes from applying to medical school.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't stress enough the need for support and mentorship, especially if you're able to
Absolutely.
get a mentor that's kind of closer in their journey in terms of like age and timeline to you,
Right.
because having physician mentors is obviously amazing,
Yeah.
but once it comes down to the nitty gritty of applying, being a medical student, there's only so much advice that they can give, because
Right.
obviously they applied during a different time,
Yeah.
and that's not to say that like it wasn't competitive then, but we're seeing the numbers that people are putting up now, the experiences that people are doing now, and like I applied what 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and I cannot imagine competing with the people that are applying now.
Yeah.
So I think it's just making sure that you have a little bit of guidance and you're not trying to get into this alone, because
Right.
you may not be aware of some things and certain obstacles that maybe your mentor can show to you. And
Right.
unfortunately, if it delays your process, then that kind of sucks. But also at the same time, you want to make sure that you're as prepared as possible with applying.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, this is really good advice. So, how do you think your experience as a medical student coming from an underrepresented group in the healthcare field could affect your medical school experience, or how does it affect your experience?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of a double edged sword,
Hmm.
in the sense that there is a lot of imposter syndrome and fear that can come with being underrepresented in medicine, ending up in spaces, like I said, where people don't necessarily look like you.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to that, I feel like there is a lot of weight on your shoulders to know that if I'm a part of the 6% of Black doctors, but 20% of the population is Black and all of them want to see a Black doctor, you're going to have a lot of patience.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
if you're ending up in spaces where they are trying to teach everybody on, racial bias, racism, stereotypings, and systemic issues and things like that, a lot of times you are going to have to bear the brunt of explaining your personal experience. And in addition to having to educate other people, you might be reliving traumatic experiences, but
Right.
in your head, you're trying to do it for the greater good of educating people around you.
Mm-hmm.
So that is something that I want people to be aware of. Like I said, I don't think it's a deterrent, more so just be aware, find your support system,
Right.
invest in therapy if possible, because this is the reality of pursuing medicine as a person of color.
Right.
And in that same vein, I think it's something really beautiful because I think there's some kind of experiences and growth and achievements that I feel like only being underrepresented and pursuing something like this that you can feel and achieve and appreciate.
Right.
Like, for example, I am only on my third week of rotations, and I cannot tell you the number of Black patients that have said to me, like, we need you. I'm so happy to see you here. Like, we need Black doctors. And I can't imagine that my peers that aren't URIM kind of getting that talk.
Right.
Of course, we need doctors, and it's something that should be applauded and deserves accolade because this is not easy for anybody.
No,
But I
yeah.
feel like there's a different kind of appreciation that comes from you knowing what kind of background you come from, how the statistics are stacked against you, and that you still made it this far.
Yeah.
So also the support of one another, us knowing that I'm a Black woman, my friends that are Black women, that we are support for one another and we have a very unique experience that we can support each other in is something that makes pursuing this field so worth it.
Yeah.
So I feel like at the end of the day, it still is a privilege to do. That doesn't mean that it comes without like trials and tribulation, but I do think it's a privilege and something to be appreciative of.
Yeah, absolutely. That's honestly so inspiring and something that I hope to experience myself one day. And I guess, what is some advice that you would give to other pre-med students who are coming from underrepresented groups who are interested in applying to medical school?
Yeah, I think something I mentioned before, find a mentor.
Right.
And you can never, well, I guess you can have too many cooks in the kitchen, but you don't only need one mentor to get through the process. I feel like there's a lot of benefit that can come from having mentors in different spaces so they can provide you different kind of advice.
Right.
Another thing is that I really hope people are confident enough in their mission to get to places because something that I've seen within myself and even in my friends, and we all go to the same school, is that our school is considered a pretty good school. And some of us have talked about our experience with applying and that there was a point that we probably weren't going to apply because we thought we couldn't get in. We thought we didn't deserve it. So if there's one thing I would say is that for those people that are applying and are dealing with imposter syndrome, are seeing, unfortunately, the politics surrounding DEI initiatives and medicine, are seeing how the stats, unfortunately, are stacked against us as pursuing medicine, the disparities that affect our people. Like, you deserve to be in this space no matter what anybody tells you. And there are so many people rooting for you, people that you haven't met yet, people that you may not even ever meet. But like, there are so many people speaking your passion over you, your purpose over you, and to really identify those people and lean on them when you're having those episodes of doubt, feeling like you're not adequate, you're not confident enough. And if it is not tangible enough for you, I would tell everybody to keep a gratitude journal. It's something I started on rotations, and to just make little notes about things that patients or physicians or mentors say to you that kind of give you that push. And for those times that you do feel like you're doubting yourself, to refer back to that journal to remind you why you deserve to be where you are.
That's amazing. And that's really inspiring. And I'm so happy for you. It sounds like, you're definitely going through some tough times, but also it sounds like it's definitely very rewarding at the same time. And so I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I was wondering if there was any other, advice or information that you wish that other students knew when applying to medical school, whether it's something about the medical school application or something about the actual medical school system.
Yeah, so ironically enough, I had talked about this, or do talk about this a lot on my TikTok, that there are so many things that go into applying, being a medical student, eventually becoming a doctor, that I feel like because of my background and my peers can agree, for us that are like first gen, low income, underrepresented, that we weren't aware going into this kind of process. And unfortunately, sometimes I may feel as if I'm behind the ball because I'm just trying to catch up with all this knowledge that maybe some of my peers are already aware of because they have parents that are doctors or grandparents that are doctors and things like that. And like some of that, a big part of that is the finances. Obviously, of course, we're aware that, you know, people go hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt into going to medical school, but it just goes so far beyond just paying tuition. So I feel like taking opportunities to speak to current students about what those finances look like, not just, okay, how do you pay your rent and how do you buy groceries, but like, how much are you paying on outside resources to study for school? What does it look like registering for a board exam? For example, I just took step one. Registering for step one alone is almost $700 just to sit for the exam. I ended up pushing back 3 times and it's $100 each time. So I ended up paying over $1,000 just to sit for an exam. That doesn't include any money I've paid for outside resources for practice exams or anything. And this is a huge bill that a lot of us weren't really aware of, and our school didn't really advertise for us, and I don't think they did it maliciously. I think they just did it from a stance that they thought everybody kind of knew this, and I know some of my peers who were in the same boat as us and kind of were like, dang, you guys weren't going to say anything, kind of advocated on a behalf of students who come from similar backgrounds like us, like, I think you need to be more transparent about it. And our school took that feedback very well and are looking for more ways to be more transparent about the finances that go into taking board exams. So that's something to think about, all the financial costs, buying scrubs, tools, like the list goes on and on. Another thing is to kind of discuss this quote unquote hidden curriculum. So I just feel like it relates to a lot of the nuances and underpinnings that go into being a successful medical student and matching successfully, working successfully. And it's not really things that are advertised like in admissions and things about, oh, like, oh, pass your class. Like, gratefully, we're entering a kind of healthcare education sphere where competition is kind of being mitigated because classes are switching to pass fail, evals for rotations. It's just, you know, are you satisfied, successful, pass, whatever. Step one is now pass fail. But obviously that raises the question of like, now everybody's on a level playing field. How do we realize who's better than others? That's where you're having to start looking to more research, leadership opportunities. And those are things that involve more networking than it does like sitting in a classroom and doing well on an exam, which is what we're all used to. So I think being aware of those kind of hidden expectations and requirements that you need to meet in order to be a successful medical student and match successfully before it's too late, because our peers, especially those that come from backgrounds that they have doctors in their family, like, are starting research since the first day of school. Like, some people are reaching out to possible mentors before we even start orientation. And it's kind of, you know, me personally, I like trying to scrabble now and trying to find things to do when, you know, I have peers who've been doing it for 2 years already. So I think that's something else to be aware of how important like these kind of extracurricular things are starting to become as a medical student, because doing well in class and on board exams, of course, is important, but they're starting to kind of look more holistically to say, okay, everybody's doing well in class. What are you doing outside? So being ready for the commitment that comes with being a medical student, because it's no longer just doing well in class. So I think that's something to be mindful of. Another thing is just like the different types of curriculum that exist. You can have ones that are taught to board exams, ones that are written by professors. So not to say that one is better than the other, but just being aware of that, you know, there's differences within curriculums, how long anatomy is. Do you have quizzes? Like, are you only taking tests? Like, just these small little nuances you never consider. And it isn't until I'm in school that either I'm like, A, I'm glad I went here, and I guess this is something I should have thought about, or B, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I like this, and if I had known prior, it might have made me take a step back to think a little more about coming to this school. So I think just being aware of like small things like curriculum, organizations, faculty appointments, leadership opportunities, research opportunities, to think, help you think what schools to apply to and eventually go into. So there's like, and that doesn't, I feel like that list is not even exhaustive. Like, I could keep going, but I'll just like put a pin in it there just to give like some insight.
And I guess, you know, sorry to add another question, but I'm just wondering, like, how do you pay for things like in medical school? Because it feels like it's so costly, but is there time to have another job? Is there time to make money? Like, how does that work?
So there is kind of other financial opportunities. The only thing is that some schools may prohibit students from working Other schools,
Okay.
it may not outright prohibit you, but the amount of commitment that you need to give to your studies, to your extracurriculars, you
Right.
won't have time to work. And
Exactly.
I feel like at least not work substantially enough that you're making
Mm-hmm.
enough money to, afford utilities off of your work. I
Mm.
think that something that's becoming more and more popular is media work. So, like a lot of social media content creation,
Mm.
which, they're not really allowing any restriction on you can't do this work, but, within like HIPAA and stuff like that. But at
Yeah.
least you work on your own time. If you're able to get enough of a following, enough of like a basis, then brands can ask to work with you, or you can
Mm.
do work for other people, and you can make a little bit of money there. And I know some students get summers off. There's another girl I follow on social media. She was working at like as like a research assistant. It was only 10 hours
Mm.
a week, but
Yeah.
that's 10 hours worth of money that she's making that other people aren't.
Right.
So, in terms of finances, working is not something that is very common.
Right.
If it is, it's more so like kind of freelancing kind of things,
Mm-hmm.
and loans is pretty much how we're all affording this, unless somebody
Mm-hmm.
has some sort of endowment or something.
Yeah.
Some schools do provide full ride scholarships, so that's something
Right.
else to consider. Also, I feel like people need to be aware that becoming a physician, and I can only speak for MD schools, but I'm pretty sure
Mm-hmm.
like becoming a PA as well, like DO, is a pretty profitable career.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
as long as you are very financially conscious upon graduation, aware of budgeting within medical school, you should be able to help like pay back your loans upon
Yeah.
graduation. There's also really great programs like I think it's the NHSC, which has a scholarship that they give to health profession students, not only physician students,
Mm.
um, if they commit to working in primary care, and
Mm.
you can get to go to school for free or you get your loans
Yeah.
forgiven. So there's also those opportunities and avenues to consider to help kind of deal with like the financial burden.
Yeah. Well, Molly, thank you so much. This was so amazing. And to
Thank you.
everyone listening today, check out Molly's Instagram and TikTok to hear more information about her experience at Mo2 Medicine, and I will link that as well. But Molly, thank you again. I know you're
Thank
super
you.
busy.